So when Quinn first asked me to come here and present with him, I honestly could not figure out for the life of me what I was going to present about. And after thinking about it for a while, I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to present about something that I think is an important thing to all of us in motorsport, no matter what part of it we're from or what affiliation we have, and that's really the fans. At the end of the day, the sport wouldn't exist in its current form without fans. Got to make money somehow, or at least keep your money if you can. I'm sure we're all familiar with the saying that if you want to be a millionaire in racing, you better be a billionaire first. But I think the way that money influences the relationship between motorsport and its fans is really interesting, and the way that kind of develops and progresses in different ways throughout the history is something that I really wanted to discuss with you all, and I'm looking forward to also hearing your feedback afterwards, because I'm sure you're all going to have some interesting stuff to say. So we really start out with the initial kind of well-known organized races being PR stunts, basically. And you might think, what does that really have to do with revenue generation or making money? But it's actually kind of the core principle of doing this. The race organized from Paris to Rouen in 1894 by Le Petit Journal is a PR stunt in the same way that the original Tour de France was a PR stunt. They wanted to have something to make content, to sell newspapers. Maybe not too far from social media today, but it's kind of where those origins start. You're not really looking for selling tickets at that time. You're not necessarily doing too much of win on Sunday, sell on Monday at that point, because most people couldn't afford the cars anyways. But we see newspapers creating these events to generate coverage. Le Petit Journal actually covers the race for many days before and many days afterwards, including illustrations of numerous of the different vehicles that are featured in the race, covering the winners and losers, and even actually offering prize money to get involvement from throughout Europe. And the Chicago Times Herald race on Thanksgiving Day in 1895 is kind of a similar situation. It's an exhibition. It's not really a sporting event in the sense that you're not going out there because you want to destroy your competition and come home being the winner. You're going out there to kind of experience it, and of course competition is always going to be an aspect of it, but very different from the motorsport that we see today, and also very different in the way that we see revenue generation today. But you know, the things that we see today, especially with trackside sales, already come in pretty early. So the initial Indy 500 is obviously organized on Memorial Day because you want to make sure that you can sell as many tickets as possible, and there's not going to be too many farmers attending your race if it's on a work day. So you got to work around that, and eventually you see even later on with Bill France doing the Daytona Beach races, he's trying to find ways to make sure people are buying tickets. He puts up those signs that say rattlesnake danger on them to make sure people are going to the designated fan areas. And that kind of theme of ingenuity and trying to find ways that you can not just engage fans, but also use fan engagement to kind of fuel the sport is something that we're going to see continuing on as we go. But I think something that's also important to cover in this conversation is the development of media and the role that it plays in all of these dynamics. So newspapers being the initial way to spread the word beyond the attending audience, kind of then transitions into radio coverage as well, and we see the first full race coverage that I could find was the 1922 Indy 500, where a local radio station covered the full race, and eventually the last hour was rebroadcast by ABC throughout the entire nation of the United States, which was a first for racing, at least in the United States, and brings the racing spectacle and the imagery, even if it's not in physical images, to a much, much broader audience than it ever had been before, taking a regional event into the national stage. And this kind of continues on with the development of newsreels and eventually with video as well, with live television. And on the right side we have a clip from the London Grand Prix at Crystal Palace in 1937. It was the first race to be broadcast live on television. And actually quite high tech. They had multiple cameras around the circuit that they could switch through. They had live commentary. And this clip is sort of a newsreel that's developed based off of that following the race. Oh, I don't think it's going to play. All right, well, it's a still from the clip. But basically, it goes through and it describes the spectacle to the fans in very careful wording to illustrate that most people are not familiar with motor racing, explaining the speed, explaining the drivers taking risks, but also it does an interesting thing where it actually covers the sidecar racing that occurred the same day, and clearly that was quite a spectacle even for the announcer who was there. If it's got issues, and I could just keep going. All right, so one thing that they do mention in that video as well is the trackside PA system, where the announcers are keeping everybody around the track updated. And I think that's another really important development at this time, because you have the information away from the track developing, and you also have the information at the track developing. You have fans now being informed about if there's a crash on the other side of the track that they hadn't heard about, maybe their favorite drivers out of the race. And it also creates a really iconic experience for a lot of people. And I think, as previously discussed, I think yesterday, Tom Carnegie at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is a really great example of this, with his iconic style, the enthusiasm, the way he would announce every speed record that happened throughout his long tenure at the track. And these things are really fueling that fan experience. There's, I'm sure, many people out there whose core memories of racing are defined by those voices, by those images. And that's something that we'll see later on becomes a key cornerstone of how the sport can kind of build itself off of those feelings and also off of those media presences. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here and bring us to post-war. And I think another important thing, not necessarily directly related to the fans themselves, is this development in technology and in the involvement in racing as a whole. So people who might have been fans ahead of the Second World War might have come back with these new technical skills. There's all of this technology available. There's an industrial boom, especially here in the United States, and grassroots involvement in racing really skyrockets. We see the SCCA, the NHRA, USAC, and numerous other bodies really coming to life and growing on a national level, and this happens across Europe as well, in France and the UK and many other places. And that, again, kind of spreads the motorsport culture and awareness to a level that had never been seen previously. And this boom also includes news coverage picking up more and more of this, both on the local level and on the national level. And also fan attendance, as you can see in the background here. This is from Silverstone, the first Silverstone race. Huge attendance for a race that had never happened before. So obviously the excitement is already there. But of course, we also have sort of the darker side of racing, which really comes through in 1955 with the crash at Le Mans. Really probably the biggest tragedy in motorsport history. We have 84 people who are killed, many more casualties as well. And I think one of the most interesting things about this in terms of the angle of fan experience is how little the people at the track really knew. I mean, if you weren't on that front pit lane stretch, if you were on the Mulsanne Straight, you had no idea that this crash occurred until about 20 to 30 minutes later when the announcers announced that there was a crash, and at that point you're already seeing a plume of smoke and have no idea what happened. The race, of course, was not actually stopped, for better or for worse. The management was arguing that it was so they could get ambulances in and out of the track. But there's not really any knowledge of what's going on, and a big panic does ensue, especially around where the crash actually happens. So both at the track and then beyond it, following days with news coverage coming out about just how severe this incident was, how many losses there were, there's a large fallout. We see Mercedes leaving racing for almost 40 years afterwards. Foreign countries like Switzerland are banning racing altogether. And the danger kind of becomes a big talking point in the immediate aftermath. With one newspaper even quoting a French World War II veteran who stated he felt he was back on the battlefield standing next to that scene. So definitely resonated very strongly with the people that were there. And unfortunately, this trend isn't going to stop right after this. And we see even the greatest drivers like Jim Clark, who was known for his mechanical sympathy, who was known for his incredible skill behind the wheel, suffering great tragedies. And these are kind of moments that could have stopped the sport altogether. So things that we might never have bounced back from. And I think that shows an incredible thing about the fans as well, that we kind of rebounded. It was almost a unifying moment for everybody, and something that we bonded through the grief, and we stepped forward with the sport continuing to grow at the same time. It's, in a way, I think, a nice way of honoring their memory as well, that the things that they love are not going to just fall by the wayside. So as we kind of transition from there, trying to get to a bit of a more light note after that. There we go. We kind of see motorsport coming into this new era where that dark side is still there, but it's sort of less present in the minds of those who are involved. In a way, we kind of compartmentalize and pace that backwards. But also, we see this face of racing come back to that sort of commercial mindset where sponsorship starts to really step in and take over, and the money coming into the sport is creating a new experience that really hadn't been seen before. Attendance numbers are growing. Racing starts to step into the pop culture scene with tobacco sponsorships being right up there, and in many ways, racing has this new sort of rock and roll appeal that brings it into a more modern era. Companies, of course, were very quick to jump onto this, looking at companies like Winston sponsoring the Cup Series and immediately taking over, promoting their products, and doing that obviously creates incredible sporting spectacle for us as fans. It's something that we would not have seen without that corporate money coming in. But they wanted something in return. You know, they're activating, they're handing out cartons of cigarettes, and I think a lot of other companies started to see this opportunity as well. You can see Goodyear branding on James Hunt's hat here. And coinciding with this, we also kind of see an increase in TV coverage, possibly because of these corporations that really wanted to boost this. But also, I think one of the beautiful benefits for me as a fan from this era is starting to see the personalities of the drivers come through more and more. We get more and more interviews, more and more moments where we can identify with the human beings behind these wheels, where we can really feel like us as fans could be right there standing next to them having a conversation. And enjoying that human part of the sport more so than ever before. As we progress, we also kind of see motorsport reaching what I kind of term to be the peak of like the raw era of racing, in the sense that, as you can see right here, this perfect picture illustrates it perfectly, that fans are lining the roads, you know, almost within touching distance of this rally car, and that's a spectacle that you don't get anymore today. You could really be immersed in it, thousands of people here to watch it happen, and that access is something we don't see anymore, but also kind of coincides with a continuing dark theme, which is the cars are getting too fast, the safety maybe isn't progressing at the same rate as the racing technology, and the lack of restriction around fan experiences like this, as beautiful as it is to sort of reminisce about, is sort of quite dark and haunting in many ways as well, because we know of the tragedies that came through from this as well. So as we progress, we kind of get onto this coinciding development of sponsorship and the financial growth of the sport, which again is bolstered by the extremity of the sport at the time, with cars doing well over 200 miles an hour. But the fan attendance is skyrocketing. Companies are becoming more and more involved, and we actually start to see full race broadcasts on television. The the Daytona 500 in 1979 being a great example of that racing product getting out to the broadest crowd that it's ever gotten out to in the United States. And Formula One broadcasts becoming full-length races, at least in the UK on BBC as well. And we also kind of get a rejuvenation of the fan experience with the voices of the sport as well. Sort of, I think Murray Walker is a great example of this, kind of similar to Tom Carnegie, where you see just how involved everybody feels like they are when you have that voice in your ear narrating, the excitement narrating, those narratives that are happening on track, and creating that racing product that sells for the companies, but also creates that emotional connection for us as fans as well. Unfortunately, at this point, I think we kind of reach another area of tragedy. I might have gone too far here. Where we see the untimely death of yet another phenomenal driver, and something that rocks us to the core, just like any other tragedy that happened earlier. But also, I think this image on the left here of Ayrton Senna's funeral kind of shows that unity that it brings to the sport and that human side of it as well, not just the contrasting corporate elements and the financial growth that these companies are driving. And it shows, I think, a really beautiful part of the human experience of sport in general, which is the passion that it develops, but also the relationships it develops too. I personally was not alive at this time, but you know, when I watch the Sao Paulo GP and I see the reverence that fans have for Senna and that emotional connection, it's something really beautiful for me to feel like I can now sort of be a part of as well, and develops a sense of sorrow, but also nostalgia that I probably wouldn't have otherwise without that connection. And sort of on the right side, we have a contrasting thing at the same time, which is that increasing corporatization of the sport, which includes, I think NASCAR depicts this the best, where these identities of the drivers are also starting to become more and more related to the companies that are sponsoring the sport. I'm kind of, as an example, if I'm thinking about Jeff Gordon, I'm probably thinking about DuPont. If I'm thinking about Dale Earnhardt, I'm probably thinking about Goodwrench. And that's something that definitely defines the sport during that era as well. But also, again, this continued influx of money continues developing the sport. It gives us more coverage. It gives us more media coverage beyond just the TV, and it forces the development of track facilities, of fan experiences. We see Humpy Wheeler developing, I mean, even ahead of this time, all of these incredible experiences for fans to create enjoyment, to create memories and wonderful times at the racetrack and away from it. But interestingly, I think that commercialization actually kind of comes back to bite the sport eventually in the 2000s with sort of, I think, a plateau in the development. I'll try that again. Sort of a plateau in this development of the product for fans, and I think a lot of fans, again, I was too young at this point and didn't really follow racing to know, but it kind of hurts the fans to feel like we fall by the wayside in the mind of the sport. I know sometimes when I'm reading articles about what F1 wants to do today, it's like quite disappointing as a fan. And you have situations like the 2006 Indianapolis Grand Prix, which was sort of a total blunder, where the fans clearly aren't really too much of the focus. It's more about the corporate goals. It's more about, maybe in the case of Bernie Ecclestone, lining your pockets a bit. But I think it's something that I can look back on now and say that I think we're doing a much better job, and that fan experience really has become the forefront of the sport again. Which I feel very lucky to have come into racing at a time where that renaissance is kind of happening. And if you look at today, it's kind of convoluted in a way, which is something I find very interesting. You have a strong contrast between F1, which has become this very, very high-end luxury product. It's inaccessible, it's exotic. And then you have something like IMSA, which is very near and dear to my heart, where you can still go on a grid walk and you can still see those cars up close and personal. The mechanics might let your kid walk in and take a picture next to the car in the paddock. And that's a really beautiful thing to me. That kind of brings you back to that raw spirit of racing and that community that's been built around it. At the same time, you know, we have totally different ways of interacting with the sport than we ever did before, and I think sim racing is a really good example of this as well. It creates a racing spirit that, again, creates a stronger identity with the drivers and with the sport as a whole new appreciation with what happens on track and also what happens in the garages. I'm an avid iRacing fan. And having done a couple of 10, 12, 24-hour races with my buddies, I can say there's no way in hell I could do that in real life. Even just making setups, I mean, I changed the anti-roll bar once and all of a sudden I'm backwards. But it's beautiful to be able to look at the racing in real life with that perspective and appreciate much more than just the car on the track, appreciate how much hard work goes into it. And I think it's easy to overlook that with sort of how, for lack of a better term, clickbaity a lot of racing media has become these days. But yeah, so you have that kind of crossover between increased access and that sort of sense, and also in the amount of information that we have available now. I'm personally, when I watch a race, I'm looking at the gaps, I'm looking at tire strategies, and I'm trying to figure it out as if I actually have any control over what my favorite driver is doing. But it's kind of a fun part of the sport for me, and I think something that's beautiful about it, even if I'm farther away from that product than I would have been if I could have reached out and touched a rally car. Not that that would be a good idea, but. Which kind of leads me to I think, the elephant in the room when we look at the racing experience for fans today, and that is social media. F1 obviously is kind of, the staple as far as motorsport goes, and those numbers on the right-hand side there can tell you quite a bit about the growth that F1 has experienced due to its recent efforts in social media and also sort of things like Drive to Survive. But it's kind of a mixed bag for me in the sense that it's beautiful to see these sports blossoming because of this and creating new avenues for money to come in and continue to generate an incredible racing product. Of course, a lot of racing and a lot of my favorite series, such as IndyCar or IMSA, are more sort of B2B focused at this point. But at the end of the day, even with the B2B, if you don't have any fans, then the companies aren't going to be there either. So it kind of is developing in an interesting way where at days I feel like, because I'm such a nerd about this, that I might be better than the fans who just follow on social media. But I don't think that that's really fair to say at this point, because they're showing the appreciation for something we love the same way that we do. And it's kind of great to see that we have now this new avenue to support that passion. So with that, I think I'll close, and I would love to hear from you guys as well. I'm sure you all have very different ideas about all of this, and I appreciate your time.
All right, Lucas, you struck a nerve online, and
I kind of figured.
We're going to go back to 2006 at Indianapolis. Raise your hands if you were at that race. I was there, one of the disappointed many that were at made the trek to Indianapolis that year. Just a little correction, because we were talking about it. When you refer to that race in particular, it's a moment in time that many of us are not happy about still to this day. It wasn't about Bernie, it wasn't about F1, it wasn't about popularity. That was 100% about safety. It was the first time in a very long time the drivers boycotted the race, and it was a problem between Michelin and Bridgestone, and the 6 cars that started happened to be on the competing tire that didn't have the issue. It was a result of Ralf Schumacher crashing the day before. It was a whole thing.
Yep.
In the end, to try to save face, right, they wanted the race to continue because money was sunk into it. But inevitably, for those of us that went, 2 weeks later, you received an apologetic letter on Formula One letterhead with your money back. So in the end, they lost it all on that race. So that one, I just wanted to pull that thread because we were talking about that. That's an exception to the rule, and it's a great thing that you brought it up, but it has to be treated in such a different light. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, thank you for providing that context, because I did not actually come across when I was researching it that they gave the money back. So that's an important detail that I missed. Thank you for clarifying that.
They had solutions. There were no solutions in the non-points race and give the 6 drivers their points, and everyone else rejected it. So it's not all about safety. They had solutions to overcome the safety issues, and it's rejected by Bernie Ecclestone and the other manufacturers. So it is partly commercial also.
Well, I'll add to that, that one car is not being tested there, the other one did not. Yes, correct. That's the result of poor management, poor planning by the other one. Happens to bring people here.
Say that again, what the last sentence?
It's all about mission.
Solo, poor planning.
By Michelin, they didn't test.
I don't think they were allowed to. I don't think they had the opportunity. That's, I'm not an expert on that point, but I went away from there. My belief is that because Ridgestone did not test, Firestone tested because they were an Indianapolis tire.
However, they were going the wrong way on the surface, and both companies were given all the technical data of the surface. One of them used it, the other one didn't.
Okay, I don't know.
That's what I would say. There was opportunity, but here nor there. I kind of agree with your attitude. You should test it for the
And there were arguments, we should change the track for the better for farm. They're not going to do that. In case Indiana's not going to do it.
Can I add something?
Grab the mic, because the online guys are here.
Our final race in Rhode Atlanta. Last year, or 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago, they actually had to turn spectators away who drove hundreds of miles on Saturday to go to the race because there was no place to put them. So we're living a similar situation of having to fix that because our access has been so good, the response was so great, we had to turn people away because the track was full. There was people parked 5 miles away to get into Rhode Atlanta, and the police finally said, we've had enough. So we had to shut down on Sunday before the race and turn people away. And it's a similar situation. The only solution is to do what was done there, send them a letter and send the money back, or have them come the next year for free. But it is a very difficult situation when that happens, whatever the reasons are.
So I'm going to go back to the sort of elephant in the room. You were referring to this kind of conceptualized segregation of fans, right? This us versus them mentality. History is not without bias. Research is not without bias. But how do we sort of capture that and study that moving forward, looking back?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult challenge with sort of any type of history. I'm thinking when I studied history in Rhode Island, all of the history there is written by white settlers. So then when you're trying to think about the experience of even the less, the not rich white people, but especially the slaves or indigenous people in the area, you have a totally biased perspective of their experiences. So when you're looking at more recent history, I think in some ways it's easier because there's living memory and there's more documentation from more diverse groups. But I also think that's why it's important to have people from totally different backgrounds and have input from people who aren't necessarily academic. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to hear all of your thoughts as well, because I've only been watching racing for 7 years. So hearing the wealth of experience and memory in this room is really, really an enjoyable experience for me and something that I've had a great time with this weekend. And I think it's a crucial part of keeping that memory of racing alive and also of continuing our academic endeavors.
Lucas Quinn, thanks. Oh, any more questions?
Yes. Are there any programs to train professional drivers on how to deal with the media, solicit sponsorship, and deal with the fans, et cetera?
I don't know if there's official programs. I know one of our professors at Belmont Abbey has done a lot of work. He works for Liegier's American division and has done a lot of work with the young drivers in the US F4 and US F3 series or Formula Regional series to start helping their focus on that develop and really instill a mindset from a younger age of how they should approach those sort of things. I think once you get to bigger series, that's more of a kind of in-house situation, but it's definitely something that's developing more and more.
Just kind of anecdotal evidence in that regard. I was having dinner with Deb Williams from Winston Cup Scene number of years ago, and she related the story of a NASCAR Cup Series driver who was essentially, for the sake of a better word, illiterate. And he was sponsored by a major, major coffee company, and they had to actually send him to charm school to teach him how to answer questions, how to interpret questions, how to even sign his name so that he could make a legible autograph. And they got him to where he could sign his first name. And the instructor said, "Good enough, people know who you are." And then they cut him loose with a multi-million-dollar contract. But that was the kind of training, kind of old school training. What do you do with someone who has raced their whole lives but really hasn't done much else? And then you throw them into this media-rich corporate environment and expect them to survive and support your product and promote your product. It's a real tenuous kind of a relationship then.
All right, Lucas, switching gears back to your presentation. We have a question from online from the UK. Ben asks, you mentioned briefly about going out and touching the rally cars if you could go back in time in your time machine. To what extent do you think having access to physical, historic racing cars alters your perception and engagement with that past?
Yeah, so I think personally, being a history nerd, I'm probably gonna have a different take on that than a lot of racing fans, but I do think that the history of racing is appealing to fans of all ages and from all areas. And I think there's nothing quite like standing around one of those cars. I mean, you can see footage of it online, but when you stand next to one of those cars and realize how small they are and how fragile they are compared to even our road cars today, and think that somebody might have been hurtling down a dirt road, accelerating from 0 to 60 in like 1.8 seconds on gravel, that's kind of horrifying. And then you see it, and it's extra horrifying. So I do think that that's a really important experience to be able to grasp how far racing has come. Well, you could say horrifyingly awesome.
So I appreciated your couple of references to media and racing. And early on in your talk, you begin with newspapers. And I'm pretty sure that in 1895, the first race in America, the first road race in America, was in Chicago.
Yes.
At Thanksgiving.
Yes.
It was part of a newspaper war between maybe the Chicago Trib and the Herald, I believe.
Yep.
And it was quite a spectacle. They had a huge snowstorm, which made a mess of everything. But there it was in 1895 newspapers.
Yep. Yeah, no, and that's it's very similar to. I don't know that the Petit Journal, when they organized the race in Paris, had a newspaper war going on, but I referenced the Tour de France as well, and that was a direct result of a newspaper war between Le Vélo and I can't remember what the name of the other newspaper was, but it seemed to be a theme from that time period.
Lucas Quinn, thanks very much. I just want to mention real quick, on the series of podcasts we did with Eric and Lauren, when we asked the question of all the ladies, what was the best part of their job? Every single one of them said, the minute I strapped myself into the car. When we asked them what the worst part of the job was, there were two: hustling sponsorship and social media. So I just wanted to let you know. Yeah.
I believe it.
So we're going to take a very quick break. Thanks very much, Lucas and Quinn. And get ready for our next speaker.